In this video, we're going to talk about the Archaic Age. The Archaic Age follows the Dark Age and normally is said to begin around 776 when we start to see the villages of the Dark Age growing into polises, or a larger polis. So the Greek population was expanding and the land could no longer support the inhabitants. And so we see the Greeks engage in a number of strategies to solve this issue. And we see Greek trading increasing. The Greeks begin to import food from Egypt and from the Black Sea, these very fertile areas around the Mediterranean, while exporting olive oil, pottery, silver, slaves. This brought the Greeks into contact with the current Mediterranean trading power, which was the Phoenicians, who we talked about last week. The Greeks, however, end up surpassing the Phoenicians. They developed ships called pentacontas, and the pentaconta was about 90 feet long. It had an iron beak with about 50 oars, and they were able to outmaneuver the slower Phoenician ships. The Phoenicians were also under attack from the Assyrians. And so the Greeks were able to seize much of the trade of the Phoenicians, and the pentacontas are significant because of that, because they enabled the Greeks to do that. And so through these trading voyages, the Greeks are going to bring back a lot of Middle Eastern culture back to the Greek mainland. They brought back the Phoenician alphabet. They brought back the practice of coinage from the Lydians and began issuing their own coins. They adopted Egyptian styles of sculpture and art. And so we can see in early Greek statues developed at this time some striking similarities with famous Egyptian statues and sculptures that the Greeks were inspired by. However, Egyptian styles of sculpture and art were very stiff, and with the Greeks, we see them begin to develop their own style pretty quickly, in which the emphasis is on realism and portraying the humanity and the human spirit of the figure. And it's kind of consistent with these Greek values of individuality and competition that we were exploring earlier this week. And so we have these early archaic sculptures, and we have a famous one here, the Apollo of Timea, which is shown smiling, and the smile is supposed to be the sign of a free citizen. And it's interesting to think about why that is the case. But either way, it shows the Greeks' interest in portraying the humanity of men and women in the sculptures that they developed, that they wanted to capture that human spirit. Move on now to the next slide. We'll look at another Greek solution to the issue of the rising population and the static food supply, and that was the practice of emigration. And so we start to see Greek colonization. We'd seen Greek colonization already with the Minoans and the Mycenaeans and their trading empires. This is called second wave Greek colonization. And so we find the Greeks establishing more colonies around the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. The colonies typically have a mother polis, and they adopt the culture and the government of their mother polis. And these are established throughout the Mediterranean. And then even the colonies themselves begin to establish their own trading colonies. And we see the spread of Greek culture further across the entire Mediterranean basin. The third and final solution that we see the Greeks employing to the challenge of their growing population is the practice of conquest through warfare. And so here we see the rise of the polis of Sparta, its reputation for being a military power, and the Spartans conquering land around their city and around the Greek mainland, along with other Greek cities, in order to enlarge the territory that's providing food, that's feeding their population. Move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about the ways the Archaic Age changed Greek society. So you have the rise of trade, and soon trade becomes the main source of wealth in this society. So previously, what had been the main source of wealth? It had been farming, so land was the main source of wealth. This meant that those who controlled the most land were the most wealthy figures in this society, the aristocrats, the warriors, as we talked about. Now we start to see that the wealthiest in this society are actually going to be the merchants, but they're so from a wealth perspective, they're leading the way. From a social perspective, they're behind because they lack the ancestry of the aristocrats. And what's going to change this, so this is not really a stable situation where you have the people who have the most power in the society, or the most wealth in the society, unable to exert direct political influence. It's always a bad situation. That's going to change because of the rise in warfare and the practices of conquest and naval wars against the Phoenicians that I was just talking about. Previously, warfare had just been something that was fought between aristocrats. You have pretty small armies, you ride out in your chariot, you challenge someone to a duel, and the battlefield is just a series of single combat duels. And if you read the Iliad, and I strongly encourage you to read the whole thing, not just the excerpt for this week, you'll see that this is how war is depicted in a work that was written during the Dark Ages. This starts to change as Greece becomes more wealthy as a result of trade. So as the cities become more wealthy, war becomes for higher stakes, the cities want bigger armies, and the governments and the merchants fund the creation of these large armies. And so instead of just cavalry and charioteers, you start to have infantrymen known as hoplites, who wear armor made of bronze, they carry an 8-foot spear, they fight in this very well-known formation called the phalanx, where they're all working together and moving the spears forward together. By around 650, all the major Greek city-states had adopted this new modern way of waging warfare. And this legitimated the merchants who formed these armies of hoplites carrying out or holding greater political power. What's the reason the aristocrats hold political power? It's because they're the ones who do the fighting. They're the ones who have the resources to outfit themselves, to be elite warriors, and to fight for the city. Those who are putting their body on the line to defend the city should be the ones to choose city policies. Makes sense. And so now you have a much larger percentage of the population, including the merchants, who are fighting these wars, who are also putting their bodies on the line, and they have much greater credibility in demanding that they have a say in the running of the city. And so we start to see changes in Greek government as we move through the Archaic Age. I'm going to stop there and take another video to move through the rest of the material of this chapter.